Sir Charles Hindle-Jones and Bobo versus the Ghosts of the Bermuda Triangle. Chapter 1. A Cruise of Ill Omen. The year was 1938, and Sir Charles Hindle-Jones had most certainly seen better days. While he remained a man of indomitable British spirit, impeccable taste in waistcoats, and an enduring love for brandy, he could not ignore the slight creak in his knees, nor the way the younger generation of adventurers spoke of him as a legend of a bygone age. Bobo, however, looked exactly the same, small, sharp-eyed, and forever judging Sir Charles's life choices with the wisdom of an ancient oracle trapped in the body of a small monkey. It was Bobo's idea, or rather the result of a contest Bobo mysteriously entered them into, that had led them here, aboard the SS Excelsior, a luxury cruise sailing through the Bermuda Triangle, the so-called Devil's Triangle, where ships vanished, compasses spun wild, and people whispered of ghostly forces beyond comprehension. Sir Charles, naturally, found such rumours utter nonsense, and had resolved to do what any respectable gentleman would do on a cruise: drink heavily and avoid exertion at all costs. The first order of business upon boarding the ship was securing a fortified position at the bar. The lounge was grand, boasting crystal chandeliers, polished mahogany counters, and the delightful hum of a live jazz band playing in the corner. Sir Charles leaned lazily against the bar, swirling his brandy with the air of a man who was not technically supposed to be here but had no intention of leaving. Bobo, seated beside him on a stack of cocktail napkins, sipped delicately at a tiny glass of sherry. "You know, Bobo," Sir Charles mused, "I do believe we have earned this." Bobo chittered in agreement, raising his glass. And that was when the trouble arrived. A thick shadow loomed over them. A man like an overfed walrus in a white suit sneered down at them, his presence an offense to good taste and reasonable hygiene. His gleaming monocle caught the light, and his cruel little eyes settled on Bobo with undisguised contempt. "Ah, so they allow vermin to drink at the bar now?" he drawled in a thick Teutonic accent. Sir Charles looked up, blinking at the walking insult before him. "I beg your pardon?" The walrus man smirked. "This creature," he gestured at Bobo, "it should be in a cage, no? Or perhaps stuffed. I hear the Americans pay good money for such things." There are few things in this world Sir Charles would not tolerate, and an insult to Bobo was one of them. A punch was thrown, and in a blink, the bar erupted into chaos. Sir Charles, despite his many questionable decisions in life, was still a formidable pugilist when drunk. He and the walrus man, who he had only now learned was named Baron Von Butberger, traded blows across the lounge, knocking over trays of champagne and terrifying at least 3 elderly women in mink stoles. Bobo, ever the faithful companion, did his part by launching a well-aimed bread roll directly into Butberger's eye, causing the man to howl in rage and swing blindly. The fight was reaching a most dramatic conclusion, Sir Charles winding up for a final, devastating right hook, when, suddenly, the ship lurched violently. A massive impact struck the hull. Glass shattered, passengers screamed, and the entire ship tilted to one side. Sir Charles and Butberger were thrown off balance, tumbling into a pile of chairs and scattered bottles. Bobo screeched in alarm, grabbing hold of the bar as the lights flickered. "What in the name of Queen and country?" Sir Charles began, scrambling to his feet, only to freeze as a deep, unearthly hum reverberated through the ship. The jazz band had stopped playing. The entire room had gone silent. Sir Charles, despite his many questionable decisions in life, was still a formidable pugilist when drunk. He and the walrus man, who he had only now learned was named Baron Von Butberger, traded blows across the lounge, knocking over trays of champagne and terrifying at least 3 elderly women in mink stoles. Bobo, ever the faithful companion, did his part by launching a well-aimed bread roll directly into Butberger's eye, causing the man to howl in rage and swing blindly. The fight was reaching a most dramatic conclusion, Sir Charles winding up for a final, devastating right hook, when suddenly the ship lurched violently. A massive impact struck the hull. Glass shattered, passengers screamed, and the entire ship tilted to one side. Sir Charles and Butberger were thrown off balance, tumbling into a pile of chairs and scattered bottles. Bobo screeched in alarm, grabbing hold of the bar as the lights flickered. "What in the name of Queen and country?" Sir Charles began, scrambling to his feet, only to freeze as a deep, unearthly hum reverberated through the ship. The jazz band had stopped playing. The entire room had gone silent. Somewhere outside, in the vast and endless ocean, something was waiting, and Sir Charles had the distinct and unpleasant feeling that their holiday had just come to a spectacularly bad end. Chapter 2. A gentleman never abandons ship unless absolutely necessary. Panic swept through the SS Excelsior as passengers scrambled for lifeboats. The ship groaned as it listed further to one side, the sound of metal twisting and water surging into the lower decks, sending waves of terror through the crowd. Sir Charles, brushing glass from his jacket, sighed. "Well, Bobo, I do believe our evening has taken a turn for the inconvenient." Bobo chittered in agreement before tugging at Sir Charles's sleeve and pointing toward a group of elderly women struggling to get to a lifeboat. "Right, let's be off then." With a mixture of grace and brute force, Sir Charles hoisted one particularly frail old lady into a lifeboat, followed swiftly by her panicked companions. "There you are, ladies. Do remember me fondly should we all survive this ordeal." Just as he turned back to grab Bobo, a most disturbing sight met his eyes. Baron Von Butberger, now dressed in a stolen bonnet and shawl, was attempting to pass himself off as an old woman to secure a seat. Sir Charles frowned. "Oh, absolutely not." Without hesitation, he grabbed Butberger by the collar, and with the strength only found in moments of righteous fury, threw him overboard. There was a satisfying splash. "Good riddance," Sir Charles muttered, before grabbing Bobo and leaping over the side himself, landing in the cold Atlantic waters. With the ship sinking rapidly, Sir Charles and Bobo clung to a floating life jacket, watching as the doomed vessel slipped beneath the waves. The ship's captain, true to British form, gave a stiff, upper-lipped salute before disappearing into the abyss. Just as Sir Charles was considering the wisdom of carrying a spare flask of brandy in such situations, a wailing sound echoed across the water. Both he and Bobo turned. Out in the distance, something glowed an eerie green, rising from the darkness. Chapter 3. Into the fog. The green fog rolled across the waves, thick and unnatural, swallowing the remaining lifeboats and scattered survivors. A low, haunting wail echoed through the mist. Neither wind nor wave, but something far older and hungrier. Sir Charles gripped the life jacket tighter. "I don't suppose that's a rescue party, Bobo?" Bobo clung to his shoulder, eyes wide, shaking his head vigorously. Then, through the fog, a massive wooden shape emerged, a ghostly Viking longship. Its tattered sails billowing, its crew of skeletal warriors leaping into a nearby lifeboat, axes raised. Before Sir Charles could react, the fog closed in around them, the sea yawning open, and they were pulled beneath the waves. Chapter 4. The Lady of the Island. Sir Charles awoke to the sensation of cold, wet sand against his face and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. His head pounded, and he felt as if he had swallowed half the ocean. A moment later, a small but determined paw smacked him across the cheek. "Bobo," Sir Charles groaned, eyes fluttering open. "While I appreciate your concern, I must insist you allow me at least a few moments to suffer in peace." Bobo chittered impatiently, pointing upwards. Sir Charles followed his gaze and immediately felt his heart skip a beat. Standing above them, silhouetted by the eerie, ghostly glow of the beach, was a woman. But not just any woman, a vision of beauty with auburn hair, sharp eyes, and the stance of someone who had seen far too much yet refused to be broken by it. Sir Charles was smitten instantly. The woman crossed her arms and regarded him with mild amusement and equal parts skepticism. "You certainly took your time waking up," she said. "Most men in your position would be panicking by now." Sir Charles struggled to his feet, straightened his waterlogged waistcoat, and attempted a winning smile. "Madam, I assure you, I am in a perpetual state of mild panic. I've simply learned to wear it well." The woman arched a brow, then extended a hand. "Amelia Lockhart." Sir Charles froze mid-handshake. The name was not unfamiliar. In fact, it was legendary. Amelia Lockhart, the aviatrix who had vanished over the Pacific in 1937. Thought lost to history. And yet, here she was, alive, standing before him on a beach that should not exist. "My dear lady," he said, shaking her hand with genuine admiration, "you are quite possibly the most astonishing discovery I have made in my life." And I once found a priceless Fabergé egg inside my own waistcoat pocket with no memory of how it got there. Lockhart smirked. Glad to see you still have a sense of humor. You're going to need it. Amelia led them further up the beach, where the land became shrouded in a perpetual mist, the air thick with the whispers of the long dead. A ruined village sat on the edge of a dense jungle, its structures warped and weathered by centuries of storms and something far less natural. Sir Charles took in the sight and, against all better judgment, whistled appreciatively. A ghost island? My dear, if you were looking to impress me, you've most certainly succeeded. Bobo slapped the back of his head. Lockhart chuckled but soon grew serious. I've been trapped here for over a year, she explained. I was flying my Lockheed Electra across the Pacific when I hit a storm. Next thing I knew, I was falling through the sky, except I wasn't in my world anymore. I was here. This island isn't on any map. It's a place where lost souls end up. Sir Charles scratched his chin. A lost island for lost people? How terribly poetic. Lockhart nodded toward the towering mountain at the center of the island. There's a cave up there, hidden in the rock face. I think it might be the key to getting out of here. Sir Charles squinted up at the sheer cliffside, noting that the entrance was easily 100 feet above ground level. Well, he said, clapping his hands together, I do love a good challenge. Bobo smacked his forehead. Sir Charles grinned. Bobo, my dear fellow, I do believe I have an idea. Chapter 5. A holy remedy and a ghostly ambush. As they trekked inland toward the mountain, Sir Charles patted his waistcoat pockets, sighing in relief when he retrieved his trusted silver brandy flask. He turned to Lockhart with a gleam in his eye. My dear Amelia, you may not be aware, but I happen to be an ordained minister, strictly for legal drinking purposes, mind you. Lockhart blinked. I beg your pardon. Without hesitation, Sir Charles uncapped his flask, held it solemnly before him, and muttered a blessing that was half in Latin, half in drunken improvisation. With a satisfied nod, he took a sip and then offered it to Bobo, who sniffed it warily before approving. Holy brandy, Sir Charles declared proudly. Should prove useful, I dare say. Moments later, the air grew thick with a chilling mist, and an unnatural silence fell upon the jungle. From the shadows, figures in old German military uniforms emerged, their bodies half-transparent, their faces hollow and sunken. World War I Germans, Lockhart whispered. Ghosts. Sir Charles straightened his coat. Ah yes, well, bloody Germans do have a habit of turning up where they aren't wanted. The spectres advanced. Their eyes glowed a sickly blue, their mouths opening in silent screams. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the leaves. Sir Charles took one bold step forward, raising his blessed brandy flask. I rather think you chaps should reconsider. The ghosts hesitated. Sir Charles then unceremoniously flung a handful of brandy at them. The spirits let out a collective wail as the brandy burned through their spectral forms, causing them to twist and dissipate into the night. The remaining ghosts turned and fled into the shadows, vanishing entirely. Sir Charles capped his flask with a triumphant smirk. Holy brandy never fails. Lockhart stared at him in astonishment. I can't tell if you're brilliant or the luckiest idiot I've ever met. Bobo made a so-so motion with his hand. The trio finally arrived at the base of the mountain, staring up at the cave entrance, looming 100 feet above them. Well, Bobo, Sir Charles said, giving his monkey companion a meaningful look. I do believe this is your moment. Bobo gave an exaggerated sigh, rolled his eyes, and then began his ascent, scaling the rocky cliffside with practiced ease. They watched as Bobo disappeared into the cave's shadows, his small form swallowed by darkness. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Sir Charles frowned. He's been gone quite a while. Lockhart crossed her arms. Think something happened to him. Sir Charles looked up at the ominous cave, his stomach twisting slightly. I rather hope not, he muttered, because if something happened to Bobo, then we are, for lack of a better term, completely and utterly doomed. Chapter 6. A rope from the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Sir Charles and Lockhart stood at the foot of the mountain, eyes locked on the darkened cave high above them. The silence was oppressive, save for the occasional gust of wind rustling through the jungle. Sir Charles, hands on hips, exhaled sharply. Bobo has never taken this long before. Either he has found something utterly fascinating, or something has found him. Lockhart frowned. What if he's in trouble? Sir Charles adjusted his cuffs. Then I shall personally march up there and, with a sudden whip of movement, a thick rope unravelled from the cave entrance above, dangling before them like a snake. Sir Charles took a cautious step forward, peering up. "Ah, Bobo, my boy, you had us worried." But Bobo did not appear. Instead, Von Butberger's sneering voice echoed down. "Nein, Herr Hindle-Jones, your pet is otherwise occupied." Sir Charles stiffened. His eyes narrowed as he spotted the glint of a revolver peeking from the darkness above. Lockhart's fingers twitched toward the small knife she kept at her belt. "Who's that?" Sir Charles exhaled slowly. "That, my dear, is the singularly most repugnant man I have had the displeasure of meeting." Von Butberger's round, bulbous silhouette emerged at the cave mouth, holding an unconscious Bobo by the scruff of his tiny neck. "Your little monkey put up quite the struggle," Butberger said mockingly. "But alas, he is merely a monkey." Sir Charles clenched his fists. "You bloated, flea-ridden excuse for a villain. If you so much as harm a hair on his head, you will do as I say," Butberger interrupted. "You and your charming companion will climb up this rope and join me. If you hesitate, I shall throw your precious monkey from the cliff." Lockhart shot Sir Charles a tense look. "We can't let him hurt Bobo," Sir Charles sighed. "Oh, I assure you, madam, I have no intention of letting him hurt Bobo or of letting that gelatinous windbag leave this island in one piece." "Enough talking," Butberger barked. "Up now." Sir Charles grabbed the rope with an exaggerated flourish. "Well then, up we go." As he climbed, his mind was already whirring, formulating a particularly unpleasant fate for Baron Von Butberger. Chapter 7. The Riddles of Mu. The cave was vast, its walls shimmering with an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Strange ancient symbols adorned the stone, twisting and shifting as though alive. At the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal of black obsidian, was a glowing crystal the size of a man's fist, its facets refracting time itself. Von Butberger stood triumphantly before it, his revolver trained lazily on Sir Charles and Lockhart. Bobo, still unconscious, was tied up against a nearby rock, his small chest rising and falling steadily. "I have waited years for this moment," Butberger gloated. "The time crystal of Mu, the key to unlimited power." Sir Charles, dusting off his lapels, sniffed. "I don't suppose you'd care to elaborate on why exactly you think this gaudy trinket is worth all the bother?" Von Butberger's monocle gleamed. "Of course, you British fool. You see, I knew the ship would sink near the island. I planned it." Lockhart's eyes widened. "You sank the ship?" "Ja," Butberger smirked. "I knew that only in the chaos of disaster could I find the one mind capable of solving the riddles of Mu." He turned back to Sir Charles, his smirk widening. "Yours." Sir Charles blinked, then blinked again, then burst out laughing. "I say, you truly believe I have the mind of a scholar?" Sir Charles guffawed. "My dear fellow, you have spectacularly miscalculated." Butberger's smile soured. "Do not play games, Hindle-Jones. You have a reputation for blundering through puzzles with inexplicable success." "Well," Sir Charles admitted, adjusting his cufflinks, "I do have a rather uncanny knack for escaping certain death." Butberger's eyes gleamed with menace. "Then you shall put that skill to use. Solve the 3 riddles of Mu, or I shall shoot the woman first." Lockhart tensed, stepping slightly closer to Sir Charles. He felt the weight of her gaze, the silent plea that he find a way out of this. Sir Charles sighed dramatically. "Fine. But let it be known, Butberger, that when the tables inevitably turn, because they always do, I shall take great delight in feeding you to something unspeakable." Von Butberger smirked, gesturing to the pedestal. "Begin, then. Step forward and face the wisdom of Mu." Sir Charles took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and with a confidence he absolutely did not feel, stepped deeper into the cave. Sir Charles peered at the wall, where 3 ancient riddles were carved into the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light. The first read, "I have no mouth, yet I speak. I have no legs, yet I run. What am I?" Sir Charles stared at it, frowned, then muttered, "Probably some sort of nonsense about wisdom or the wind." He leaned against the wall in frustration, and to his utter surprise, the glowing text shifted and vanished. The stone groaned, and an unseen mechanism clicked. Butberger blinked. "You solved it?" Sir Charles looked just as surprised. "Did I?" The second riddle shimmered into view. The more of me you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? Sir Charles, who had just taken a step forward, muttered. Trouble if I had to guess. His foot scuffed the floor, dislodging a loose stone. With another click, the riddle disappeared. Lockhart folded her arms. You're doing this on accident, aren't you? Sir Charles cleared his throat. Nonsense. That was entirely intentional. The final riddle emerged. The more you share me, the less you have. What am I? Sir Charles rubbed his temples. A secret, obviously. He turned exasperated. Why must these ancient civilizations be so dramatic? As soon as he said it, the text faded and the pedestal began to rise, revealing a stone staircase leading deeper into the cave. Von Butberger's eye twitched. I spent years preparing for these riddles. Sir Charles dusted off his cuffs. And yet here we are. Lockhart smirked. I think we should keep moving before he realizes he's been outwitted by sheer incompetence. Sir Charles grinned. Splendid idea. With that, they descended into the unknown. Chapter 8. The Wailing of the Damned. As Sir Charles, Lockhart, and Von Butberger descended deeper into the cave, an eerie wailing began to echo through the cavernous chamber. It started as a whisper, 1,000 voices overlapping, pleading, begging, until it swelled into a chorus of anguished cries. The very air seemed to shimmer, heavy with despair. Sir Charles adjusted his cuffs. Well, this is profoundly unsettling. Lockhart shivered. I don't think we're alone. Spectral figures began to materialize, emerging from the walls like mist unraveling in the wind. Men and women from different eras of history, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted with longing. A British naval officer from the 18th century, a lost Spanish conquistador, an Egyptian priestess draped in golden finery, a modern pilot in a tattered flight suit. They reached out desperately, their fingers stretching for Sir Charles and Lockhart, pleading silently. Von Butberger took a nervous step backward. What is this? A ghostly voice whispered against Sir Charles's ear. Free you as crystal traps you as we cannot pass but beyond. Sir Charles stiffened, his hand brushing against the hilt of his belt dagger. Ah, that would explain the overwhelming sense of existential horror. Lockhart turned sharply to Butberger. The crystal, it's stopping them from moving on. Von Butberger's grip on his revolver tightened. Good. Then it shall serve me well. With the power of the crystal, I shall travel through time itself. Sir Charles sighed. Oh, for heaven's sake, must you monologue? Von Butberger raised his pistol, his eyes cold. You will solve any further mysteries for me, or I shall kill your lovely companion. He pressed the barrel against Lockhart's temple. Sir Charles's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Lockhart shimmered. Her form flickered like a candle in the wind. Her body became translucent. Von Butberger stumbled backward, his mouth agape. What is this? Lockhart turned towards Sir Charles, smiling softly. A sad, knowing smile. I had to help you, she whispered. You and Bo. I couldn't leave the island. Not until I saw you through. Sir Charles's breath caught in his throat. No, you can't mean. She reached out, her fingers passing through his sleeve like a breath of wind. I died the day I crashed, Charles. Sir Charles swallowed hard. For the first time in a long time, he was at a complete loss for words. Von Butberger, however, was not. His face twisted into a sneer. Then you are useless to me. He turned his gun toward Bobo's limp form, still bound against the rock. But this one is not. Sir Charles snapped out of his shock. Without a second thought, he lunged forward and grabbed the time crystal from its pedestal, lifting it high above his head. A wave of blue-white energy burst outward, sending ghosts and shadows recoiling. The cave trembled, the wailing turning to shrieks of pain and release. Von Butberger's eyes widened. 9, he screamed, spinning toward Bobo and pressing the gun to the tiny monkey's head. Sir Charles locked eyes with him. Time itself seemed to slow. There was only one move left to make, and, by God, he intended to make it count. Chapter 9. A moment suspended in time. Sir Charles raised the time crystal high above his head, ready to smash it into oblivion, but just as his arms tensed to throw it down, everything stopped. The wailing ghosts froze mid-scream. The swirling mist stood still, hovering like frozen smoke. Even Von Butberger remained motionless, his lips curled into a sneer. his gun still aimed at Bobo's unconscious body. For a moment, Sir Charles assumed it was simply another of the unpleasant supernatural occurrences he was getting quite used to. Then he noticed something strange. He could move. He turned slowly, blinking at the frozen figures around him. The entire world had paused, but he alone remained free. "Well, this is rather peculiar," he muttered, adjusting his cuffs. Testing the situation, he walked forward, approaching the Baron with deliberate slowness. Von Butberger remained frozen, the sweat beading on his forehead, the gun locked in place. Sir Charles grinned. "Oh, my dear Butberger, this is truly a most delicious twist." With casual ease, he pried Bobo from the wretched villain's stiff hands and laid him gently to the side. The little monkey still didn't stir, but his chest rose and fell faintly. He was alive. "Now what else do we have here?" Sir Charles mused, turning back to Butberger. He reached out and deftly plucked the revolver from the Baron's grip, twirling it in his fingers before tucking it into his belt. "Can't have you causing any more mischief, can we?" With everything set right, he walked back to his previous position and once again lifted the time crystal high. Time to finish this. He hurled the crystal downward with all his strength. The shattering sound was like 1,000 thunderstorms colliding, a burst of green and blue energy swirling outward, flooding the cavern in a light so bright that Sir Charles had to shield his eyes. The wailing of the spirits rose to an unbearable pitch. Then, silence. When Sir Charles looked again, the spirits were gone. Lockhart stood before him, still radiant in the ghostly glow of the cave. But now she was fading, her form becoming less distinct. She smiled, her voice gentle. "You did it, Charles." Sir Charles swallowed. "It appears I did, but must you go?" Lockhart nodded. "I was never really here. I just couldn't pass on, not while I had something left undone. You and Bobo needed me." Bobo, suddenly stirring, opened his eyes and blinked in confusion. He took in the scene, the shattered crystal, the fading ghosts, and the Baron standing frozen before immediately snatching the revolver from Sir Charles's belt, aiming and firing. The gunshot rang through the cave as Von Butberger's body jerked back. Time had resumed, just in time for the Baron to let out a screaming wail as he toppled backward, tumbling from the cave entrance into the abyss 100 feet below. Sir Charles and Bobo stared at the drop in stunned silence. Sir Charles coughed. "Well, I was going to handle that in a more traditional manner, but I suppose that works too." Bobo simply spun the gun in his tiny hands before tossing it aside with a satisfied chitter. Lockhart laughed softly, now barely visible. "Now take care of each other." Sir Charles gave a deep, respectful bow. "Goodbye, Amelia. You were one hell of a woman." Her smile lingered for a moment longer, and then, with the faintest gone, lost into the ether. Bobo looked up at Sir Charles, then placed a tiny hand over his heart and solemnly saluted. Sir Charles sighed. "Come along, old boy. I do believe we should find a way off this cursed island before something else attempts to rewrite history." With that, they turned toward the cave entrance, the storm above clearing, the dawn breaking over the haunted island, now finally at peace. But their adventure was far from over. Chapter 10, A Toast to the Living. The island had transformed. Where once there had been mist and wailing spirits, now there was warm sunshine, golden sands, and a gentle ocean breeze. It no longer felt like a place of death and despair, but rather an untouched paradise, as though the island itself had been freed along with its lost souls. Sir Charles and Bobo made their way down to the beach, where they were met with a most delightful sight. Survivors from the cruise, a group of disheveled but very much alive passengers, were gathered around a large bonfire, some tending to injuries, others simply marveling at their continued existence. One of the more enthusiastic survivors, a portly gentleman in a tattered tuxedo, waved them over. "Hindle-Jones, you're alive, and you brought the monkey," Sir Charles beamed. "Indeed, and I see you've been making yourselves quite comfortable." The man gestured to a large wooden crate resting near the fire. "We found this washed ashore, a case of brandy." Sir Charles's face lit up. "By Jove, the island truly is blessed." Soon glasses were passed around, and a merry gathering formed, laughter mixing with the crackling flames of the bonfire. For the first time since the disaster, there was joy. Bobo, perched on a log, happily nursed his own tiny cup of brandy. Sir Charles raised his glass. "A toast to the living, to the dead, and to the extraordinary nonsense we find ourselves in." A hearty "hear, hear" followed, and the brandy flowed freely. Charles at last indulged in a well-earned nap, snoring loudly in his cabin. But Bobo, ever curious, sat in the dim light of their quarters, idly flipping through Sir Charles's belongings. As he rummaged, something shiny and unusual caught his eye. He pulled it from the depths of Sir Charles's jacket pocket, a small fragment of the shattered time crystal. It still glowed faintly. Bobo's eyes widened as he turned it over in his tiny hands. Something wasn't quite finished yet. Tune in for the next adventure, Sir Charles and Bobo the Time Monkey.